I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传习鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Chapter 70 of the Dao De Jing. Let me go ahead and just read the chapter from beginning to end, and then I like to point out the structure and make some comments on it. Chapter 70. My words are easy to understand, easy to practice. The world cannot understand, cannot practice. My words have basis. My actions have principle. People do not understand this. Therefore, they do not understand me. Those who understand me are few. Thus, I am highly valued. Therefore, the sage wears plain clothes, but holds jade. So, the very last sentence, the very last line of 70 is the most important one. It talks about the behavior of sages. So the sage wears plain clothes. That just means that the sage doesn't bother to stand out, doesn't try to make himself or herself look different from other people, does not speak with a loud voice to attract attention. But so just in general, the sage is just looking like everyone else, blends in, but holds jade. The very last character, jade, this is a metaphor for the Tao itself. The idea is that the Tao is like a priceless piece of jade. So in Mandarin, 是以圣人被褐怀玉. And I'll get to the pronunciation when we get to the very end. The characters for wearing plain clothes, those are no longer used in modern Mandarin, and therefore it's often necessary in Mandarin books about the Dao De Jing to make special notations on these ancient characters that are only used in classical Chinese. Okay, so for now, let's go ahead and take a look at the structure. First, we identify the common characters from one line to the next. So even from lines 1 and 2, you can tell you've got a couple of repeating characters here. This character has been translated as understand. You can also translate it as know. K-N-O-W, know. And then xing. This character is also repeated. That character usually means to go somewhere, to travel somewhere. Here, it's in the same context. Like when we say talk to talk, walk to walk, the walking part is the doing part. So here, it is in a similar way, extending the action of going someplace to basically taking an action. So that's repeated from 1 and 2. Then you're going to see a character repeated in lines 3 and 4. That's the character you, and that just means to have something, to possess something. Now, didn't mark it here because they're not exactly in the same position, but zhi, this character is repeated in the last position, as you can see here in 5 and 6. And then in 7 and 8, these 2 lines, you'll see 2 characters being repeated. So this is enough to give us a clue on the overall structure. So you can tell, for instance, there's an invisible line between here and here. And what I mean is between 6 and 7. And then you can tell that there's an invisible line here between lines 2 and 3. Now, there's even a little bit more commonalities in characters, so I'll point those out real quick, and then we'll do the division of the sections. So in blue, I'm pointing out that you've got a bunch of repeated characters here. In line 1, you've got 2 characters repeated within it. In line 2, you've got 2 characters repeated. So respectively, in line 1, it just means very easy. In line 2, just means cannot. Cannot know, cannot understand, cannot do, cannot go. So that is the meaning. That's the repetitions that gives us a hint as to the underlying structure of 70. So when I draw these lines, it will seem much more natural when you take the repeating characters into account. So now we have 3 sections. We have a beginning section, a middle section, and a very end. In the beginning, we talk about the difference between what Lao Tzu sees as the simplicity and the directness of his words, and what the world sees him as being rather mysterious and difficult to understand. And the middle section is talking about how is to expand on the introduction, basically talks about how the reason why Lao Tzu is easy to understand is when you know the principles of the Tao, then everything comes together. Now, people don't really bother to understand the principles of the Tao, therefore, all bets are off. Everything else they look at, the words they listen to, the actions they observe, they don't seem to make a whole lot of sense. They're not that easy to understand. And then lastly, talks about the precious Tao, how it is highly valued because it's relatively few that can really understand. So that's the overall concept. So let's go ahead and delve into it. First, I want to go to line 1 and isolate 3 characters, basically mean easy to understand, and talk about those. So those are the 3 characters that I have drawn from line 1. So easy to understand. So what that means, the point here is that we may look at the Dao De Jing as something that's really hard to understand, and in fact, I would say most Chinese people today will regard the Dao De Jing as something that's rather difficult to comprehend. But back in the days when it was first written, the goal that Lao Tzu had was not to be mysterious, was not to be hard to comprehend, but to be easy, to be plain, to be direct. So he did talk about some concepts like the Tao being formless, but he never did go deeply into that because the goal was to be clear, direct, and to the point. And he had a practical side of it too. He wanted to make sure that all the things he talked about, people could apply to life. We'll get to that next. Okay, so today, it's not just in Asia where people see the Dao De Jing as difficult to understand. In the West, we have all these translations, but we oftentimes see the opposite of clarity, directness, and being to the point. We see a lot of people who think that Dao De Jing is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. That expression there is Winston Churchill. He talked about Russia in that fashion, and that became like an expression, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. So people see the Dao De Jing as being so mysterious, full of that Oriental mystique, inscrutable, hard to comprehend. In reality, Lao Tzu wanted to say that no, it's actually really simple. Now, because it was the goal of Lao Tzu and the other Tao sages to be direct and very simple in what they talk about, a real cultivator of the true Tao, what I call an authentic Tao cultivator, would be similar in the way that he or she speaks. Rather than to use a lot of flowery, fancy language. The authentic Tao cultivator will be plain spoken, will be very direct in pointing things out, not beat around the bush. So I think, for many people, that's rather appealing. You want someone who speaks directly, straight shooter, not a whole lot of, dressing up what you talk about. In today's environment, a lot of times we would say that this would be the opposite to someone who's politically correct. You might say that someone who speaks his mind doesn't bother with, dressing up the language, glossing things over, that someone is politically incorrect. But in ancient times, that person would simply be in accordance with the Tao. Call it what it is, basically, is the idea. So just a warning for everyone. Today, I plan to follow the essence of this chapter very closely. I, too, will be plain spoken. I, too, will run the risk of being politically incorrect. If there are things that are frankly dumb, I will say so. I will say, well, that's just stupid. I will not say, oh, it's cognitively challenged. That's the kind of language that we kind of hide behind nowadays, but I have to make it a habit to not speak in that way, but to call it what it is. So that's my warning. I may be offending half the people in our meeting today. Okay, so let's get to the next part, which is easy to practice, 甚易行, easy to go, easy to travel to that place, abstracted to mean an action that you take, not just going somewhere. So the idea is that the Tao is eminently practical. It's applicable in everyday life. It's based on reality, so it's not just connected from reality. You want to, and recently I had an experience. Last Sunday, I had a talk with someone who was very concerned about a child. So while I sympathize greatly, with the pain that a parent feels, at the same time, without saying so, and perhaps I should have said so, without saying so, I also felt that this person was looking for a silver bullet. That is, a magic wand that I can wave to make the problem go away. That sadly does not exist in the Tao. A problem that's a long time coming, that's been forming over years and years, will take some time to resolve. There's nothing that I can say to parents who have, who now discover that they are not getting along with their kids. There's nothing that I can say to them to instantly fix the problem. It's not possible for me. It's not possible from anyone. The Tao is practical. It's not magic. So a practical solution to a problem like that has to be carried out over a long period of time, starting with the parents taking proactive action to practice the Tao in every possible way. But that's enough about that. Let me talk about the next thing. So the character xing is to go someplace, to travel someplace. And in the West, we have a similar expression. We say talk the talk and walk the walk. And when we say that, we mean someone who's not just good at explaining something, expressing something, but also actually doing it. So walk the walk is the metaphor for actually putting those ideas into action in everyday life. So it's very similar in this particular usage. So just like a Tao cultivator, making it a point to speak plainly, to be blunt, very direct, very frank, very open. So in a similar way, authentic Tao cultivator would also make it a point to put into action all the teachings of the Dao De Jing. So this is where I find that a lot of times we say, yeah, we should talk the talk and walk the walk. Other times we'll hear people say, well, that's easier said than done. So evidently, it isn't always possible to talk the talk and walk the walk. Sometimes when it's easier said than done, it means that you can talk about something and not be able to put it into action. So I do have some examples on that coming up. So I'll get to it later on. For now, let me complete this particular slide with this particular example. In the previous chapter of the Dao De Jing, that's the one using warfare as a metaphor. And it says that generals have a saying that in war, on the battlefield, you should not advance aggressively, you should withdraw tactically. So if you were to understand what Lao Tzu was talking about with that particular passage and apply it to life, then you would be very careful in your interactions with other people, that you are not infringing into their personal space in an aggressive manner. You would be respectful of their personal space, and when they're saying something, rather than to cut them off halfway to say what you want to say, you give them the space, you back away, so to speak, you give them the space to finish saying what they want to say. Now, you might object to that. You might say that, well, what if I forget what I was going to tell them? That's okay. You can just basically say nothing and let them continue talking. That's okay in the Tao. Not easy to do, I know. Sometimes when you're just like, ooh, that is so ridiculous. A lot of times what people do when they talk is that they will pile on ridiculous assertions one after another. So when they are on ridiculous assertion number 4, you really feel like cutting them off so you can respond to the ridiculous assertion number 3 or number 2 or number 1. But the practice of the Tao is that when that is the case, just let them mouth off. It's no skin off your nose. It's okay. Let them do what they want to do. It's okay to be quiet. It's okay to remain silent. It doesn't really gain you anything to cut them off or to shout them down. So as difficult as that is, I would ask everyone to think about that carefully and then actually apply that to life. Not easy, I know. Okay, so let's get to line 2, where we talk about how people cannot understand. Well, why is that? So there's a couple of common ways for people to make the Tao difficult to understand, and sometimes they do so in a way that's very intentional. So let me explain. One, they like to make things more complex. So the Tao itself is actually very simple, but you will always find people who try to complicate things, because in that complexity, they can make themselves look good as the authority or the expert. And number 2, they want to introduce uncertainty. So not just complexity, but also talk about how, well, we don't really know if it is this way or if it is that way. We don't really know what Lao Tzu actually meant when he wrote these words. When that happens, I'm automatically skeptical, and I would probably be the one to say, no, actually, we do know. And I will tell you exactly how we do know later on. I want to share with everyone the way that I studied the Dao De Jing based on books in Mandarin that provide complete explanations. So there's actually very little uncertainty in the Dao De Jing. There's a great deal of clarity in the Dao De Jing. So the reason why the above gets done, making things more complicated, making things less certain, is all about the ego. Like someone who talks about things as being very complicated is interested in appearing to be authoritative. Yeah, all that complexity, only I know the details. Or all that uncertainty, only I can give you the certainty. Only I have the wisdom.
And sometimes they'll use the uncertainty as the wisdom. This is what happens when people say that, well, the more I learn, the less I know. So now that I have reached a stage in the understanding of the Tao, now that I have learned all these things, now I find that I know nothing at all. So ask me any questions, my answer is, well, I don't really know, because I have learned so much. That's another way to demonstrate the ego. So the uncertainty part, this is when people say, who knows? What is the truth? What is the truth anyway? It is so uncertain. Are you right? Are you right? Is he right? Is she right? Who knows? And that's, like I said, that's when I'm automatically skeptical. That's when I detect that here is an attempt to bamboozle people, to pass oneself off as some sort of an expert. The real experts, I find, in every aspect of life, they always have a way to make things simple. The best experts of the world simplify complex matters so everyone can understand. And they boil it down to just a few points that anyone can grasp. So the best experts of the world want everyone to be independent and not need the expert. The false experts of the world want to be needed by everyone, and therefore they'll make things as complicated and as uncertain as they possibly can. Okay, so I want to give some examples. Here, this is what I have here, example number 2. That's the uncertainty part. Well, what about making things more complex? Well, let me be very specific. How can you tell when people are making things more complex, especially when it comes to the Tao? Well, I'm going to offer you top 3 signs, and then we'll take our mid-meeting break. Top 3 signs someone is only pretending to know a lot. You can tell I'm speaking plainly and bluntly. I know that I'm not being politically correct. I know that I will be offending people. That's okay. This chapter is all about that. It's all about that directness and simplicity. Number 1, overuse of jargon, often without explanation. So in a discussion, if you find someone keeps coming up with specialized terms that other people sort of half understand, and some people seem to get it, some people don't, and they don't bother to explain the reasoning, the meaning behind those terms, okay, well, that's one, I would say that's one red flag, that this person is now trying to present himself as some sort of an expert by pretending to know a lot, because, hey, look at all this jargon that I know, that I throw around. When you really know something, you prefer the other way. You prefer to explain things in a very simple fashion with a minimum of jargon. Number 2, this is what I encounter in the West quite a bit. When I encounter people who don't really know Mandarin at all, but maybe study it academically, maybe use a dictionary a lot, they will always say, number 2, oh, every Chinese character has many definitions, so who can tell what is the best translation? Every character has multiple definitions, and therefore all of them together, they multiply, multiply, multiply. Every line has hundreds of possible meanings. And that's when I say, well, there are stop signs in China, and they just mean stop. They don't have a whole bunch of other definitions. You don't need to puzzle over exactly what the stop sign means. It's got one definition only. And I will further say, it's actually no different from any other human language on the face of this planet. In English, we have words with multiple definitions. We have tons of them. That doesn't introduce any confusion in our day-to-day conversations with one another. A lot of times, you figure out what people are trying to say by context, by tone of voice, by the subject matter that you are talking about. No one is confused about the multiple definitions. What is the same with Chinese? Yeah, every character has Many characters have multiple definitions, not all, but you always can figure out what it means. And number three, I also hear there's a lot from the fake experts out there on the Dao De Jing. They talk about the many versions of the Dao De Jing. Indeed, there are many versions of the Dao De Jing. There are many historical versions. And so sometimes I get asked the question, which version of the Dao De Jing do you use in your translation? Generally speaking, people who get into that area of the Dao De Jing, they want to find out, for instance, if I'm using the oldest known version of the Dao De Jing that was unearthed from a tomb, that doesn't look exactly like the Dao De Jing that we use today. The Dao De Jing itself, these people are not really aware that the Dao De Jing that's in use today is a standard version of the Dao De Jing. It was consolidated by a scholar by the name of Wang Bi about more than 1700 years ago. So we've had 17 centuries of standardization of the Dao De Jing. Now, the versions before that, there were multiple versions before the version that Wang Bi presented as a standard, but those are more a curiosity or a subject of research by scholars. They're not the ones that are being studied. They're not the ones that have influenced Chinese culture, dynasty after dynasty, century after century, for more than 1700 years to today. So I can talk knowledgeably about the many different versions of the Dao De Jing. I can tell you what the differences are between one particular historical version to another. And I'm also here to tell you that people who delve deeply into that, they're wasting their time. They're not using the standard Dao De Jing to improve their lives, to think about how they are maybe not applying some of the basic teachings of the Dao De Jing, like simplicity. Keep it simple, keep it direct, and keep it true to life. Apply what we have right now instead of getting into academic minutia. So that's going to come as a shock to some people who are listening, especially later on when this is all recorded in YouTube. It's going to come as a shock to people who are really into the academic study of the Dao De Jing. But I'm not going to pull any punches today. I'm going to call it exactly as I see it. So on that note, I'd like to ask that we all take a 5-minute break. When we come back, it should be around 11:35, and we'll continue with chapter 70. So continue on with chapter 70. So let's take a look at this line that says the world cannot understand, cannot practice, cannot do the Tao, so to speak. So what does it mean when people cannot practice the Tao? Well, I see a couple of common situations. One, I oftentimes see people who can talk about the Tao, but cannot actually do what they talk about. Talk a great game, but can't actually deliver. Another situation is that I see that they say they practice the Tao, but what I observe is that the Tao they practice is highly distorted, and I will explain what I mean by the distortion. So in general, I find that people who talk the most are also the ones who do the least. And conversely, it's also true, people who talk the least oftentimes are the ones who do the most. So you can almost draw a inverse relationship between talking and doing. So those who talk a lot, I'm careful, I'm cautious, and I want to observe them actually doing what they talk about. And a lot of times I'm just disappointed. Now, when I say a highly distorted version of the Tao, I mean things that are strange and impractical, like teachings that you will not be able to apply to real life to a positive effect. And I'll give some examples. I have some real life examples, and I want to give these examples without naming any names because they're drawn from real life. But I do want to demonstrate exactly what I think, why I think certain people are talking about the Tao, but not actually able to practice the Tao. A fake master. So previously, a fake expert, now a fake master, identify a fake master. So there are real life people seen as Tao masters who fall far short of the mark. I see them in the West. I see them, one particular author falls into that category. I can't name any names. And then there's also a teacher, an Asian teacher living in San Francisco, who is supposed to be a Tao master, but the Tao that he practices is really bizarre. And these are from real life. So this author, this particular author wrote a best-selling book about the Tao. And he's taken photographs, and when his admiring fans and readers see these photos, some of them will say, well, look at how serene and happy he is. I want what he has. I want that happiness that he projects. And that's what I thought initially, but then later on, I discovered that behind the book, he actually cannot do anything that he talks about in the book. So I know that because he published his diary in his blog. This is back in the days, in the early days of the internet, when people really didn't know back in those days that what you put on the internet stays there forever. Today we know you put something out in Twitter, and later on you realize that it's inappropriate, so you go back and delete it, and people will, if you are lucky, no one has taken a screenshot of this thing that's embarrassed you. But then it could also be that after you delete your tweets, other people publish, oh, well, he didn't want you to see this, but here's what he actually wrote. And then they spread that around, and now it's gone viral, and it gets backed up in all kinds of different locations. So in the early days, people did not know that. And in a blog, the assumption was that what I'll publish it now, this is just sort of like my journal. When I don't want people to see it, I'll shut it down. No one can see it. So what they didn't realize at the time was that there are archiving websites that literally go out over the internet and save a copy of each blog post. So you got to be so careful what you put out there, because whatever you put out there, it's forever. So this one author wrote in his blog about his dealings with the publishing industry. After the initial success of his best-selling book on the Tao, he wanted to create other books that are similar, and he basically had nothing nice to say about any of the people that he dealt with. Blog post after blog post was full of complaints about how this person sucks, that person is awful, and this person is ignoramus, etc. Complaint after complaint, it would be the exact opposite what you would expect someone who lives the life following the Tao and feeling joy in the Tao every day, walking the path. And the other big revelation is that he talked about his poor health. He talked about how he's suffering from anger, frustration, and anxiety all the time, so that every night when he goes to sleep, he's grinding his teeth. And he's got dental records that show his teeth being ground down to basically nothing. Well, that's really severe. So that is an actual person. Most people don't know about this because they haven't been, back in those days, it's the early days of the internet. Not many people like today have mastered their Google search skills and can locate something like that very quickly. I was in the internet back in the early days. When I saw this, I was shocked. It can still be found today in the archiving websites. However, I am going to be respectful of this author's privacy. I will only use this example as someone who knows the Tao, supposedly, so much that he published a book on it, an entire book on it. And the book became so well received that it was a bestseller. And yet he cannot practice the Tao. So there's a difference between knowing, writing about it, and actually doing. So number two, this particular teacher in San Francisco, he taught his students, again, a real life person whose name I won't mention, but his students record that when the student drove up to the teacher in a brand new car, the teacher took out the baseball bat and hammered on the hood of the car. And when the student was surprised and shocked, and why did you do that, master? The master explained that, well, I'm doing you a favor because now that I've put some dents on it, this will protect you from having this car being stolen. So to the Tao master, quote unquote, this makes perfect sense. But this is not the Tao. Sorry, this is just not the Tao. I will call it what it is. This is dumb. And the other time, the student records that he was driving the Tao master somewhere. They're on the freeway. The Tao master tells him to pull over to the bank, to the embankment. And he got out of the car and he relieved himself right there on the side of the freeway in full view of all the passing cars. And the Tao master is like, he doesn't think anything of it. And the student is like, really shocked. Master, why did you do that? And the master says, well, I'm just doing what's natural. In the Tao, we have to do what is natural. Folks, that's not the Tao. Okay. So these are real examples. For all I know, these people are still out there. They're still talking about the Tao to others and disseminating all kinds of erroneous notions about the Tao. Okay, so moving on. Now I want to isolate one particular character and talk about Zong. So first of all, here's the opinion. But I know that English speakers, when they look at Z-O-N-G, you might think that it's Zong, like King Kong or ping pong. No, but it's actually Zong. It's an O sound. So the opinion system can sometimes be misleading. So what does it mean? Well, when you say 祖宗, you mean ancestor. Here, it's abstracted to mean source or basis. And the idea is that this character, an ancestor, is the source of your life. The ancestor, maybe a great-great-great-great-great-grandparent has given life to all the subsequent generations. Therefore, if you trace back the source of your life to the ancestor, that ancestor is the source of your life. The other possible meaning, abstracted, is basis, like foundation, like the ancestor is the basis of a bloodline, that follows. So here, 言有宗, the words, meaning the words of Lao Tzu, this is Lao Tzu writing this chapter talking about himself, 有, the words have zong, they have a basis, they have a source. So what that means in particular is that all the words that we read in the Dao De Jing, they're all based on something. They're all sourced in something. And in general, it was all based on life itself. So Lao Tzu, having attained this old age and having studied the Tao for years and years and observing everyone around him, he talks about life on the basis of what he has observed and what he has experienced and what he has learned. So everything he talked about was backed by evidence. None of what he talked about was his own philosophical speculations. So the basis for the Tao, one, foundation built on observations and experiences from life, from living life itself. Number two, if you think about the role that Lao Tzu had as the royal librarian, archivist, he was the one in charge of all the ancient scrolls for a particular king. So he was able to read up on the past writings of the great sages from thousands of years ago, from his time. So the concepts that he talked about were concepts that were proven for many, many generations. for centuries, proven themselves in time. Today, what we study are the concepts that have been proven from his time to ours. So when he wrote about the Dao De Jing, the concepts he wrote about have been proven for at least 2,000 years. And now the concepts that we read about in the Dao De Jing are proven again for another 2,500 years. So that's the basis for the Tao. Now let's tackle the next line. We have this character Jun. So here again, we have something that's a little bit misleading from pinyin. Pinyin is Jun. So a native English speaker might say, oh, Jun or June, like the month of June. Well, the month of June would actually be closer to Jun. So I'll say that again. June, the month of June, closer to the actual sound in Mandarin. Jun, it's a tricky sound to make for the native speaker of English. And I'm not sure that this is really all that close, but it's the best I can do. Jun. And what does it mean? So Jun in Chinese, in Mandarin, is a monarch or a ruler. Now you can see the correspondence. You know, in the two lines, the parts of the two lines corresponds. The middle characters is the same. The first one, this is words. 是, this is what you do, the affairs, the actions. And then 宗, ancestor, corresponds to 君, the king or the ruler. Here it's abstracted to the ruling principle. So just like 宗 abstracted to the basis, the source. Here it's the ruling principle, and it just means that my words have a basis, and the things that I do, the things that I manage they're all based on principles. So here's the counterexample. In the West, what I see most often when people fail to follow the Tao, when people follow the wrong path, that's when they ignore Pu. Pu is the principle of plainness and simplicity. So Lao Tzu talks about how all of his actions, his behavior toward other people, his actions toward other people, they're all based on principles. In the West, there are plenty of people who follow the Tao or say they do, but their actions ignore this particular principle, the principle of plainness and simplicity. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, someone who really understands the Tao, what I call an authentic Tao cultivator, that person doesn't look any different from other people. That person can blend in quite easily. That person does not draw attention to himself or herself. But that person in reality is extraordinary. Extraordinary person with an ordinary appearance. The opposite of the authentic Tao cultivator would be like a Hollywood celebrity who's actually very shallow. So in other words, someone with extraordinary beauty, you know, externally, but with very ordinary, very unremarkable inside or mind, I should say. That would be the very opposite to the authentic Tao cultivator. Of course, when you put the authentic Tao cultivator to the shallow celebrity next to each other, the shallow celebrity is the one who's going to get all the attention. So what are some examples? Okay, how to identify a fake Taoist? Brace yourself, everybody. This may annoy or offend. Okay, hopefully everybody's ready for this. Number one, you are so taken with the Tao that you get a tattoo with everyone can see it. So you can point to it and say, yeah, I'm into it, man. Look, you know, look at my tattoo. And hopefully the tattoo is right and it's not, you know, upside down or, you know, in reverse, or it doesn't say something funny that you did not intend. So if you are so taken with the Tao that you get a tattoo where everyone can see it, even if you get the tattoo right, oh, that's a yin and yang symbol, you are still trying to draw attention to yourself. And you are still not living with simplicity and plainness. So you are ignoring the principles of the Tao, even though you say that you love the Tao. Number two, this is I know this is going to be a tough one because, you know, when I encounter people, sometimes I see them, and, you know, in those moments, I don't have the heart to tell them, listen, you dyed your hair, and, you know, it's pink, and that's actually not the Tao. That's going to get them really, really upset with me. They'll be really pissed. But if you dye your hair a bright, unusual color to show how unique an individual you are, think about how this is completely different from what Lao Tzu has just explained, that the authentic Tao cultivator has a ordinary appearance, but is extraordinary within. So here, by dyeing your hair a shocking color, you want to draw attention to yourself, you want to stand out from the crowd, but on the inside, it may just signify that you have a bottomless pit that you want more and more attention. So anyone out there, if you have plans to dye your hair, I hope this will talk you out of it. Okay, so what else? What else may offend? You wear Eastern attire every day to demonstrate you are free from society's expectations, like, you know, robes. So you walk around in that. See, I actually know people like that. I've actually met people like that who are, you know, wearing what looks like, it kind of looks like pajamas, and they say that, oh, I bought this in, you know, Chinatown, and, you know, it's really cool, and they walk around like that, again, to advertise how different they are. So that's also drawing attention to yourself. That is also not living with plainness and simplicity. And number four, you act in unusual and or dramatic ways, so people will notice you are not a conformist. So this is a pretty wide net, and it can include many different things. And I just to give you one example of someone I know, he likes to go to the park and meditate there in plain view of everyone. And indeed, he likes to meditate, like, you know, in unusual places. And the reason why he wants to do that is he wants people to look at him and say, wow, look how spiritual he is. So if you are truly spiritual, you would not feel the need to advertise how spiritual you are. That's the bottom line. So again, I know this may annoy or offend, especially if you have one or more of these items. But remember, today, my goal is to speak plainly, even if I end up offending everyone. So a good question to be asked is, hey, what if I get a tattoo, but it's covered up? Then I would say, okay, you know, at least you are not advertising that to everyone. You know, it's being covered up, so only you know about it, and only your loved ones, you know about it. Yeah, I guess that's not you know, being out there. That's not trying to draw attention to yourself. Okay, I'm cool with that. Okay, so remember, when it comes to spirituality, it is so important to be brutally honest with ourselves. Let me move on. Continuing with 70. So we're now at this line, people who do not understand this, and let me talk about that a little bit. So I want to talk about this in terms of ancient times and today. It's a little bit different. In ancient times, people do not understand the Tao of or the words and actions of Lao Tzu. And the reason why is because in ancient times, it was commonplace for them to be looking for deities that they could pray to, deities who could grant them protection or favors, like blessings. You know, make me wealthy, make me healthy, give me obedient kids, stuff like that. People want things, and they want a deity who had the power to grant them. So when they discovered that the Tao had no such power, they couldn't pray to it and get results. This was something that they had trouble understanding. So they were not able to make the Tao into a deity. They turned around and made Lao Tzu a deity. So they prayed to Lao Tzu instead. So that's in ancient times. What about today? Well, I would say things have not changed that much, although today, when we study the Tao, we're not worshiping Lao Tzu, so to speak. But in ancient times, I'm talking about here in the West, many people have not heard of the Tao. So here in a coastal region of the country, here in Los Angeles, it's much more widespread for people to say, oh yeah, I heard something about that. Or at least, they've been to Vegas, they've been to Dao, the nightclub. Cool, you have heard of the Dao. Yeah, there's a nightclub in Vegas called the Dao. No, but you could be from the Midwest or a state where such things are not really talked about and not really that common. So you may not have ever heard of the Tao or Lao Tzu or the Dao De Jing. And even if you have heard of the Tao, you may not have any idea what it is. What are the concepts? What are the main ideas of the Tao? Well, probably don't know. So it's still relatively rare to find people who can talk about the Tao. All right, so let me decrypt the next line. It says, so in Mandarin, 是以不我知. And when you translate that, 是以 translates to therefore, 不 translates to no. Here, 我, that's me, understand. When you put it together, or try to put it together in English, it sounds funny. Therefore, know me, understand. So if you have encountered people who speak with a heavy accent, and a lot of times you sense that they get the ordering of the words wrong, that's because they have the Mandarin syntax in their mind. They don't really know how to change words around to make it sound more like English. So here, what it really is therefore, they do not understand me. So you would actually need to flip around me with understand to have it make more sense in English. Therefore, no understand me, meaning therefore they don't understand me. So as I said, in ancient times, there was the problem that people wanted deities. They weren't seeing a deity. In discussions of the Tao, they ended up making Lao Tzu a deity. In the West, in addition to that layer of misunderstanding, there's also the added challenge of the language barrier. So and this is where I provide like an overall assessment. I think this may be generous, but I'll say that the most popular translations out there, if I were to look at it closely, a quarter of the contents is wrong. Later on, I will show you one such translation of chapter 70. When you understand exactly what every line says, you'll look at this other translation and you recognize that it's more than a quarter wrong. And the reason why it's wrong is because usually Western writers who don't really know Mandarin, they will change the original or maybe not understand the original and they'll write what they want to say, or they write what people want to hear. So moving on. Therefore, those who understand me are few. And when you take a look at this line, character by character, you get understand me, those who rare. So again, it's in a sequence that makes sense in Mandarin, but doesn't make a whole lot of sense in English. And the character that I translate as understand, it can also be translated as know, to know something. So it's rare Those who understand me or those who know me are rare or are few in number, is what it says. So so as I mentioned, the translations are about a quarter wrong, but each one of them has die-hard defenders. Each one of them, there's plenty of people who will defend them to the death. Why is that? Well, it's because of these 4 characters in Chinese. 先入为主. What does that mean? First of all, let me provide opinion. 先入为主. And remember, X, when you see X, that's actually, it sounds like SH. 先. 先 means ahead or first. 入 means to come in or to enter. In this case, to enter the mind. 为, to be, 主, the owner or the master. This is the same 主 as in 坛主 when we talk about the shrine owner. So 先入为主, what does it mean? So when you break it down character by character, you get ahead, enter, to be, owner. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What it really means is that the idea that gets into your head first is the owner or becomes entrenched. That's what it means to be the owner. Furthermore, the real meaning, when we say it in English, is that first impressions are the most lasting. What you learn first tends to be what sticks with you. So, people who were not exposed to the Dao De Jing before, who purchased one of the many popular translations out there that are not very accurately translated at all, they will take that as, because that's what they learn from, that's the first thing they know, that 先入为主, that becomes their standard of Dao De Jing, and everything else is not quite as good. You are still holding on to that, even when a better version comes around. So in the Tao, this is about the stubbornness of the wrong idea. That is, in those translations, even though they are wrong, they are still gonna stick. People will still persist in believing them. So in psychology, this is called the primacy effect. That a lot of times people will hold on to what they learn first well beyond usefulness. And in marketing, it's called the first mover advantage. 先入为主, that is, when you come into the market first, when you are the first person to blaze a trail into a whole new market, you have an advantage. You can establish a brand. If you can hold on to it, you can have a place in everyone's mind, in everybody's consciousness. So there's a whole bunch of examples that I think you will recognize immediately when I talk about them. 先入为主. So in translations, it means that the erroneous translations that you learn about first sticks with you. In marketing, in business, it means that when you go into a market first, you get the opportunity to establish a brand like these companies. So 先入为主. So let me talk about some of these real quickly. The first row that you see here, these are company names that have actually become verbs in the English language. So you can say, could you hand me some of that Kleenex? It may not actually be the Kleenex brand that you are getting. You just mean, I need some tissue. I'm watching Titanic and I'm tearing up, so please give me some Kleenex. You mean give me some tissue. Or could you Xerox that for me? What do you mean? You mean, could you photocopy that for me? And get that FedExed, next day delivery, FedEx, that's actually a verb. Now, you may be using a totally different company, you might even say, I'll FedEx it to you via UPS or DHL or something. So FedEx itself has become the verb with that kind of delivery, that kind of shipping. And the next row are also people who have established themselves in the marketplace by being the first, and therefore take up space in our consciousness. So Kodak expression, Kodak moment. Did we just have a Kodak moment? So everybody knows what that is, because Kodak, being one of the first, is now firmly established in consciousness. Starbucks, when you look at that, you think, coffee, you think about the Starbucks place where you can go in, where you can expect to see a lot of people using their computers. That's Starbucks, that's completely fixed in the mind. Pixar is the company that pioneered, that made it really big to have these motion pictures, these movies that are completely computer generated. So if you think about Pixar, you think about that immediately, because it's the 先入为主. So the other examples are similar. If you think about Apple, it's the first company with the iPod, with the iPhone, with the iPad. So for all of those things, those categories of products, you think about Apple, you think about what they have done, it's a powerful position to be in. G, that's the Google symbol, to Google something, that's a verb. It means to search. And Microsoft, IBM became synonymous with IBM, with personal computers because of IBM PC. So 先入为主. So subsequent to these companies, other companies have come around to create similar products. Other people make PCs. Other companies make cell phones, smartphones, tablets, MP3 players, but none of them quite have the first mover advantage of these companies, because 先入为主. So that can be the positive side of 先入为主. The negative side is that if you start out with erroneous information, those information tend to stick. So continue on with the Dao De Jing, chapter 70. So then Lao Tzu says, thus I am highly valued. Now, even though few people know about the Tao or understand the Tao, Lao Tzu will still be highly valued, the Dao De Jing will still be highly valued, and that's because in the course of time, the truth will emerge. So sooner or later, people will get to know the real Lao Tzu. I believe that is the case. I have faith that that is the case. And I have faith for a couple of different reasons. Number one, machine translation is getting better all the time. Right now, it's still really bad, especially at classical Chinese. So if you try to use Google Translate for classical Chinese, you pretty much get nowhere. At the same time, I also know that it's not going to remain static. It's not going to be like that, for forever. It's going to get better and better, so that in the future, people will be able to use machine translation that's almost as good as human translators. Then it becomes obvious who's got the more accurate translation. Number two, looking at the way the world is today, with China in ascendancy, in the future, knowledge of Mandarin will be just as common as English knowledge is today. So all around the world, English is the language of the elite. Business is done in English for most parts of the world. All around the world, people who want a better life for their kids make sure that their kids learn something about English. So I believe in the future, Mandarin will begin to take on that kind of importance. And the more people really know Mandarin, the less they will be impressed by the erroneous translations that I have spoken of. Translations that make it difficult for people to really understand Lao Tzu. So slowly but surely, the Bad translations will get weeded out. They get pushed aside. People know, people understand that they are not accurate. So lastly, I want to cover the key characters. This is the very last line of 70. I want to first talk about wearing plain clothes. So last line says, therefore, the sage wears plain clothes but holds jade. So wearing plain clothes is not literal, although the sage may wear plain clothes, but it's more than that. It means assuming an ordinary appearance. So it's not just what you wear, it's also what you do, your demeanor, what you say and do. So the sage does not speak loudly. The sage does not shout, does not yell to become the center of attention. The sage does not jump on the stage, go to the podium to attract everyone's attention. The sage prefers to be observing. And the reason is because acting out, drawing attention to yourself, all of that, those are symptoms of an insecure ego, an ego that requires more and more attention. Therefore, authentic Tao cultivators have a strong preference to draw no attention to themselves, and I need to qualify that by pointing out that authentic cultivators do not sneak around, they do not hide, they're just there. They are not drawing attention to themselves, they're also not hiding. Okay, so now I want to share with everyone the process that I go through in studying the Dao De Jing myself. So this is the source material. This is one of the books that I have on the Dao De Jing itself. And of course, I know that it's none of it makes a whole lot of sense, but let me just explain. To the right-hand side, we have the title of the chapter. Here we have Chinese for 70. Then we have the original text. You're going to see a whole bunch of symbols on the right-hand side. I'll zoom in on that in just a moment so you can see it better. But the symbol on the right-hand side is bo po mo fo. That's the Chinese system of denoting the actual sounds of those characters. And this is necessary because some of these characters are no longer used in modern Mandarin. And so you always want to notate and make sure people know how to sound them out. And I'll give you an example in just a moment. So the text is read top to bottom, right to left. That can seem a little bit odd, but that's how it is. So this is the original chapter of the Dao De Jing. Right here is where you reach the end. This is the beginning. You know, my words are easy to understand, easy to practice. And here is the very end that talks about the sages wearing plain clothes and holding jade. So, and then we have the overall explanation of the chapter before it goes into a line-by-line analysis. So let me zoom in to this last part here. This is the most important part of the entire chapter. It uses the metaphor, you know, wearing plain clothes and holds jade to describe the sage. Let's go ahead and zoom in on it. So with the pronunciation notation, I know exactly how it sounds in Mandarin. 被褐怀玉. Okay, and then there's other pronunciation guides, so you don't have to worry about those. Those are for Taiwanese speakers, so they are completely different from Mandarin. And this is how the authentic study of the Dao De Jing is done. So let's cover the last two characters, 怀玉, holds jade. So what does that mean? Well, yu, the jade, is a priceless treasure, the Tao itself. So it's not a literal physical piece of jade, it's the Tao, which is formless. So this jade that is held by the sage is it's not hidden like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, my precious treasure. It's at the same time, it's also not advertised or displayed to everyone. So the Tao cultivators, they're happy to discuss the Tao, which means to show the jade, but they make no effort to initiate a discussion. That is, they don't try to bring the jade out and show everybody. And this is because authentic Tao cultivators prefer to demonstrate the Tao in action, not in words. So I now have an example of the distortions. Now that you know this entire chapter, you know about how people don't understand the words of Lao Tzu. Those understand Lao Tzu are few. That is why the Tao is so highly valued. Therefore, the sage wears plain clothes but holds jade, which is a great metaphor for the behavior of the sage. The sage doesn't call attention to himself or herself, but is an extraordinary individual. So the distortion looks like this. First, my teachings are easy to understand, easy to put into practice. I'll look at that and say, okay, well, that's essentially correct. That's what the beginning says. Then the original says, people don't understand, people cannot follow, cannot practice. It gets distorted into this. Yet your intellect will never grasp them. And if you try to practice them, you'll fail. What? That's not what the original says. The original does not say that your intellect is insufficient to grasp the Tao. What a thing to say. That's not true at all. That if you try to practice the Tao, you will fail. That's not what it says. It says the opposite, that you should practice the Tao. That most people don't because they don't understand, but you should. That's what the original says. My teachings are older than the world. What? That came out of nowhere. How can you grasp their meaning? What? That came out of nowhere. If you want to know me, look inside your heart. What? That came out of nowhere. So the last line, again, is that the sage wears plain clothes and holds jade. The holds jade part gets twisted into look inside your heart. So where's the jade? It's not anywhere in this distorted version. So this is how bad things can get if you are not receiving an authentic teaching or training of the Dao De Jing. Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. So we still have the paraphrase that we haven't done yet. I'll leave that for next time because I want to come in with some examples. This brings us to the summary today. The summary is a reiteration of the key points, two of the key points from our discussion today. So first, Yan You Zong, meaning my words have basis. This is what Lao Tzu says, and by implication, he's also saying that when you talk, you also want to base it on something. You also want to be careful of the words that are coming out of you. So here's my suggestion on how to practice that. Consider what you're about to say and see if it passes the following tests. 1, the truth test. Is what you are about to say true? Or is it something that you heard? Is it hearsay? Is it something that's a rumor and you're not sure if it is true or false, but you want to pass it on? Well, if it is not true, or if you are not sure that it is true, that it's backed up by proof or logic, then it doesn't pass the truth test. If someone tells you that he personally knows of a family that's been abducted by UFO, do you know for a fact that it's true? If you don't, it would be best not to pass it on. Number two, this is the test of kindness, or the test of goodness. Is what you're about to say, is it a kind thing to say? Is it compassionate? Does it contribute to the common welfare or the common good? If it doesn't, what's the point? If you are saying it and it will do more harm than good, then it's better to not say it. So far, what you talk about has the basis in truth and in kindness. Lastly, is it useful or necessary? Is it information that someone needs for something? So it isn't necessarily kind. It isn't necessarily something that you will put to the truth test, but it's a fact, or that it passes the truth test, but perhaps it is not useful and it is not necessary. Oftentimes you will find that gossip can fall into this category, even gossip that you know for a fact is true because you were there or you witnessed it, but then by passing it on to other people, it's really not a necessary thing to do, and plus it may not pass the kindness test. It may not be kind. So only talk about something if it is able to pass all three tests: the test of truth, the test of kindness, and the test of necessity. So make sure all of your words have some sort of basis. My suggestion are the three tests. On the internet, you will also find variations of this in the three filters. Sometimes it's called the three filters of Socrates. And the last point to reiterate is about wearing plain clothes and hold jade. Jade meaning the Tao. So 2 points there. No need to display or advertise this jade. No need to hold it up high. No need to get that tattoo on your forehead about you being a Tao cultivator. There's no need to hide anything. If someone were to ask, there's no problem for any of us to talk about what we have learned so that we can share. If someone is asking, they're giving us permission to share the Tao with them. So at the same time, there's no need to stand out. There's no need to draw attention to yourself. So there's another phrase in Mandarin, 不卑不亢, that I can talk about next time, but basically it encapsulates this expression here. No need to hide, no need to stand out. Just be natural. Just flow with it, blend in, and enjoy yourself in the present moment.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架规则是一鞠躬，接班一鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.
Participate in the Tao meeting by joining us online. For information, go to taoism.net/Tao